So Representative Spiller, as I understand, the law enforcement officer has the discretion to choose whether or not to make an arrest or order removal of the individual, correct?
Yes.
And they can take that individual, if they choose removal, to any port of entry and order them to leave, correct?
Yes, yes.
So if they take them to the Austin Bergstrom Airport and tell them to get on a flight, and that individual does not have the funds they need to purchase a ticket, does that individual now have a second-degree felony coming against them for refusal to leave?
I don't know that, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that they can order them to get on a plane. The last time anytime I fly internationally, they require me to have a passport. I don't know that you're going to, that may be a violation of our existing federal law to allow someone and to fly someone to another country without them, even if they agree to do it. I don't know that they're allowed to do that. So I can't answer that question, but I think...
Well, but then how does that work? I mean, what happens if a law enforcement officer under your bill chooses to order the person to leave the country, as we both agreed they have the power to do under this legislation, and as we agreed can take them to any port of entry? What happens if they take them to a port of entry that is an international airport? How does that resolve?
Yeah, I would think that ultimately that individual would end up at a port of entry that's on the border. That would be the most practical thing, and I think that would be the most common thing.
Isn't that what Representative Goodwin's amendment is trying to limit it to?
Well, I'm not trying to restrict or limit the bill and restrict law enforcement's authority. It may very well be that they want to fly someone from an international airport, but this bill just says the Code of Federal Regulations doesn't distinguish on ports of entry whether they're only the border, on the border, not on the border, or based in international airports. It's just a defined term as ports of entry. So I think the purpose here is to comply with existing federal law and get them to a point of entry. Now, it may very well be that DPS picks someone up at an international airport, drives them to a port of entry that's located on the border. I don't know the answer to that, but again, that gives law enforcement one of those tools and let them make that determination, the best way to get that person back to the country of origin.
Yeah, Representative Spiller, I mean, I appreciate this dialogue, but I think our concern is, and I think part of why Rep. Goodwin brought this amendment is the bill as written would allow law enforcement to take someone to an airport, order them to leave, and then if they don't, either because they can't meet the federal rules you're mentioning, they don't have their passport, maybe they don't have money for a plane ticket, it would allow them to be prosecuted with a second-degree felony for refusing to comply with a removal order.
Right, and that's not at all the way that I read the bill. It's only if they refuse to comply.
But what if they can't comply? Is that a refusal?
Well, I think if they can't comply, there is a problem in that, okay, there's already been an election made to not prosecute someone, to return someone. So I don't know the complete effect of what if the receiving country, we covered this earlier in the day about that, and so currently we have memorandums of understanding with those bordering states.
But we're talking about a situation where you've acknowledged if somebody doesn't have a passport, somebody doesn't have travel documentation, somebody doesn't have money to buy a plane ticket, and there's nothing in this legislation that would require the state of Texas to buy them that plane ticket.
Those are all good.
How does that resolve without this person getting prosecuted for a second-degree felony for not complying with an order they were unable to comply with?
Well, again, we're talking about two different things. Unable to comply and refusing to comply. The requirement for being prosecuted for a secondary felony is if they refuse to comply. Them not being financially able, or there be some other hindrance to them being able to do it, is a different matter. So I'm
with
not
all
saying
due
that
respect, Representative Spiller, if you don't pay a parking ticket, they're going to say you refuse to pay it whether you had the money or not.
They can say that, but that's not the facts. And the fact is, if someone is willing to comply and they attempt to comply, they're not refusing to comply. And the refusal to comply is the key component to refusal. So for the second-degree felony. So I don't think you get there, and I don't think any prosecutor is going to go after someone if they didn't refuse to comply. That's a key element of that offense. They would have to prove, as in any criminal case, any prosecutor knows you'd have to prove each and every element of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt. If someone was willing to comply, that's not the same thing as refusal to comply. They cannot prove that case. They would not be prosecuted for a second-degree felony.
Representative Spiller, I wish I shared your confidence that this legislation wouldn't be used in this way. I mean, given that you agree that it's unreasonable to take someone without travel documents or funding for a plane ticket to a federal port of entry at a U.S. airport and tell them to leave,
yeah. Well,
could we clean this up?
I get your point, but you're making a lot of assumptions.
This is big, impactful legislation. Right. Could we clean this up so that people aren't being dropped off at places that are logistically impossible for them to leave from and told to leave?
Right. And I get your point, but you're making a lot of assumptions. There's nothing about plane tickets in my bill. That's not included in there. There's no discussion of that whatsoever.
But it says a port of entry as defined, and that includes airports.
It doesn't mean somebody's going to hop on a plane just because you take someone to a point of entry at an international airport.
Well, how else are they supposed to leave the country from an international airport?
Well, I've been known to drive away from airports before, so I mean, certainly that's a possibility. I don't think just because someone is delivered to a point of entry at an international airport requires the state of Texas to fly someone to where they want to go in another country. I don't think it works that way.
Yeah, I think all Rep. Goodwin's amendment is asking for is that if we are going to say that law enforcement can take someone to a port of entry and tell them to leave, that port of entry at least be one they can logistically leave from.
Okay.
And I can imagine scenarios where the correct answer is an airport, but that involves that being feasible for that particular migrant, and we're leaving all of this discretion
right.
in law enforcement hands without putting some conditions on when that's appropriate.
And like I say, I understand your concern, but taking someone to a port of entry on the border where they can walk across is completely different than taking someone to a port of entry at a international airport and making arrangements to fly someone to wherever they're going. I'm not saying we couldn't do it.
And Rep. Goodwin's trying to limit it to the former. That's what her amendment's trying to do, is limit to the ports of entry that are on the border and someone can practically leave from, correct?
Yeah. I don't know that we're doing that now. I don't see that would be the standard protocol. I think more often than not, they would be taken to a port of entry on the border, but this bill doesn't require them to do that. And I know that this amendment seeks to restrict that, but that's not the purpose of what I'm trying to accomplish with this bill. I think law enforcement, and primarily in this instance, we're probably talking DPS, but any law enforcement needs to have the authority and the ability to do what is necessary under the circumstances presented, just like they make judgment calls and make decisions based on the totality of the circumstances based on a stop. They would use the same ability to determine how to best get those folks back to where they came. And so I'm not saying they couldn't put them on a plane and fly them, but I don't know that would be the most practical way.
I mean, some of my concerns here, Representative Spiller, is, as we've discussed at length today, the impact of this bill is statewide. It also penalizes people who are found without proper documentation, potentially anywhere in the state under the improper reentry crime.
Well, let's be clear about one thing.
And so if somebody is found in Dallas County, Dallas County Sheriff is probably not driving them to the border. Their closest port of entry is that airport.
I want to be very clear about one thing. This bill is not about just rounding folks up that are here illegally and send them back to the country from where they came. That is not this bill. That's what Arizona tried to do in Senate Bill 1070 in 2010. That portion of the bill was held unconstitutional. Technically, being a removable alien in the state of Texas or in our country.
Page 3, line 2 says you can get people under the offense of improper reentry for being present here.
Gentleman's time has expired.